and welcome back to the Unknown Experience. A while back I showed you a launch of an Antares rocket launched by Northrop Grumman and NASA. This launch was successful, and always good to see a successful launch. But in terms of the contracts with NASA, there's more than a fair bit of politics involved, and today we're going to look at some of it. So while this particular launch plays off in the background, I'm going to explain some of this politics to you. Take in mind, this is not a reusable rocket. So no part of this rocket can be reused. This specific rocket costs the American taxpayer through NASA about $475 million, and that's for one launch. It's got a potential payload of about 8 tons, give or take.
100%. Attitude nominal.
The SS Ellison Onizuka now on its way to the
Its
International
cargo
Space
was
Station
delivered
to deliver
safely.
more.
What you see behind me now is the launch of a Falcon rocket from SpaceX. Now, take into consideration that this is a reusable rocket to a large degree, and for 3 of these rockets, it costs the American taxpayer or NASA roughly $450 million. It's got a payload capacity of up to 20 tons.
Stage 1 tanks pressing for flight. T-minus 15 seconds.
Like I said, first time in 10 years that astronauts were launched from American soil using a private company. First time for a private company at least.
4, 3,
And the first time in 10 years from American soil.
ignition. Liftoff of the Falcon.
Take in mind that the US government or NASA was totally reliant on Russian rockets for that particular period from roughly 2010 to 2020.
Everything continuing to look good. Next major event coming up is going to be the triple. We'll have main engine cutoff of the 9 first stage engines, stage separation. You heard we're throttling down the Merlin engines on the first stage.
There you can see the separation any second now. There we go. Second stage on its way to the International Space Station. First stage going back to Earth towards the drone ship. And that's where, my friends, the reusability comes into effect.
Seconds away from that first stage, starting that entry burn on your right screen. We should be able to see that live. And there is that entry burn beginning.
Booster rockets firing,
For our first stage,
and there you can see the drone ship.
our drone ship, of course, I still love you.
SpaceX nominal orbital insertion.
Confirmation is nominal orbital insertion.
Landing shortly here.
Falcon 9 first stage.
And completed safely.
You can see on your
Landing done. Used a couple of times. Now tell me from your perspective, if you were in NASA, which one of these 2 companies would you use? The one offering one launch for $475 million, one launch, not reusable in any way, shape or form, only a capacity of about 8 tons? Or would you go for SpaceX with the Falcon rockets, partially reusable, 3 launches, $450 million? So which one would you consider the best or the sane option here? Yeah, I'll leave it at that. There's one particular YouTuber that brought something to my attention, and I think it should be brought to many people's attention that are interested in spaceflight and evolution of spaceflight and NASA news. So we're going to look at an article before I introduce you to this YouTuber or space fanatic, if I can call him that. So what you see on screen here is an article by Tara Kopp, senior Pentagon reporter from Defense One. The headline reads, "Spacesuits and lawsuits put 2024 moon landing in jeopardy." The article goes on to explain that because 2 spacesuits might not be ready by 2024, the lunar mission or the moon landing mission planned for 2024 might be in jeopardy. And feel free to pause the screen to read the full article. But the other thing that the article also mentions is that because of delays caused by the lawsuit from Blue Origin, who also had a bid in for this moon lander, the mission might not take place. Even Elon Musk apparently now stated that he would be willing to assist NASA in developing these spacesuits. And I think he's got more to lose than anyone else. If this space program does not continue, he will lose a substantial investment. If you think about it, SpaceX got awarded the contract for the moon lander, and obviously Blue Origin went to court to fight this decision, even though SpaceX had the cheaper option available and possibly a more practical, although not easily executable. So I think Elon Musk has much more to lose in this regard than anyone else involved. That might be why he's offering to assist. I'm going to introduce you to the Angry Astronaut, a stand-up guy that always says it the way he sees it.
So until NASA embraces a complete and comprehensive policy to never allow a launch provider to send up one of their missions unless they're at least trying to embrace reusability, until they start doing this with every single launch provider without exception, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.
I definitely recommend checking out his channel. So doesn't that seem strange, the way that contracts are being awarded? It would make sense, according to me, if you were a space agency, that you would check, that you would make sure that you pick the most reliable and the most inexpensive option between the options that's on the table. There's clear distinctions to be made between the two options. One seems to be much better at providing a service at a cheaper rate. I understand that you would like to create an environment where it's competitive and you don't have a monopoly where one company runs the entire show and no one else gets opportunity to showcase their potential and develop as a company. That brings up the question, why is NASA awarding contracts that's overpriced for a lesser service potentially? SpaceX provides reusable rockets, or at least partially reusable. I understand giving contracts to various companies. I think they should just make sure they provide contracts to people that have an eye out on the future in terms of reusability and price tags coming down. Because if your company are focusing on reusability, the price tag would come down, and there's lots of advantages to this, including and not limited to reusability, but also price and function and so forth. I guess it's a question of having friends in high places, I don't know. And it kind of reminds me of a certain political entity starting with an A here in South Africa that runs the show, and no one is allowed to question their authority or point out the facts. But make up your own mind in this regard. I just find that there's much room for improvement in terms of how NASA handles their contracts. So going on to something a bit lighter, well, heavier. Big rocket explosions. I'm going to show you one in a bit, some footage from Soviet Russia that was not available at the time when it occurred in the early 1970s and late 60s. But it was released a couple of years ago already. So when I play out, I'll play out with that video footage so you can take a look at this particular rocket or this event. Before I play this footage, let me explain to you the backstory about this. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, when the Cold War was still going strong and tensions were high between the USA and Russia, the Russians were actually in the lead in terms of the space race at the start of the 60s up to the middle of the 60s. And the Soviets at this stage were planning to launch to the moon. and they were developing secretly a big heavy lift rocket that they could use to get heavy objects to orbit and potentially to the moon. This rocket was named the N1 rocket, and they built 4 prototypes of this. Now, all of these prototypes either exploded in midair or burst into flame on the launch pad. At one stage they actually had to rebuild the whole infrastructure around this, which is why it took them many years before they finally gave up on this particular mission to develop this heavy lift rocket. Now, this particular heavy lift rocket, the booster had 30 rockets. Now that reminds you of booster number 4. Booster number 4 currently has 29 rocket engines and potentially will end up with 33 or 34, somewhere around there. Now, SpaceX learns from the past. Failure is definitely an option, because through our failures we learn, and if there's one thing that Elon Musk stated many times that we can all learn from, is that you don't need to be afraid of failure. Remember, as always, stay safe, don't panic, and see you again.